What happens if the polls are correct and if the presidency now is turned over to the Democrats, the House remains Democratic, and the Senate flips and becomes Democratic, but the Supreme Court is now strongly 6-3 conservative? You'll hear my take on The Dirt Show. It now seems likely that Judge Amy Coney Barrett will become Justice Barrett, the ninth Justice of the Supreme Court. The confirmation hearings are going very smoothly for her. She has been well prepared. She answers every question without notes. Most of her answers are, I can't tell you how I'm going to vote, but we know how she's going to vote. We know what her views are. They're not secrets. We know from the president who nominated her, the process by which she was nominated, her own writings and her own answers to questions. She will obviously not be in favor of a woman's right to choose abortion. Whether she will overrule Roe versus Wade, nobody knows for sure. Likely not. More likely, she will follow in the tradition of some of the other conservative justices who, every time they have the opportunity to cut back on a woman's right to choose, they do so without overruling Roe versus Wade. And I suspect we will see her become part of that stronger majority on the issue of gay rights. Nobody's going to overrule the right of gay people to marry, the right of the gay people to choose their partners and to do what they want in the privacy of their homes. But we may see some restrictions when it comes to anti-discrimination laws. We're going to see a justice who is constitutionally and perhaps personally not particularly sensitive to the rights of gay people, the rights of women to have abortions, the rights of people to be safe from predators with guns. Her views on the Heller case, on the Second Amendment, are certainly on the side of those who interpret the Second Amendment as give a personal right to own and possess guns rather than the right of a militia to have guns. Generally, she will be a conservative justice, and that should not surprise anybody. It will now mean that the Supreme Court will have a clear 5-4 conservative majority, in the sense that on issues that relate to constitutionality, how to interpret the Constitution, there will be 5 justices who can generally be counted on to rule in favor of the conservative side. Chief Justice John Roberts, who is himself personally conservative. I remember him when he was a brilliant student at Harvard Law School. Will vote with them often, but not always. He will try his best to become a swing vote. On occasion, he will be joined by Justice Kavanaugh. On fewer occasions, perhaps, by other justices of the Supreme Court. But I think we can rest assured that for the next several years, we will see a pretty solid conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Is that something to bemoan? It's certainly not something for a liberal like me to celebrate, but I am not going to be Chicken Little here. I'm not going to say the sky is falling. I think the most likely outcome of the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, depending on what happens in the election, I think the most likely outcome, at least according to polls, and remember it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said the job of a lawyer is to predict, in fact, what's going to happen. So I'm going to make some predictions, despite the Talmudic admonition that the ability to prophesy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple, and he who tries to prophesy is a fool or a knave. I don't regard myself as either, but I do take seriously the polls. Remember, I predicted that Hillary Clinton might very well lose the 2016 election, even though she was way ahead in the polls. I think the polls today are pretty solid in favor of Vice President Biden, is likely to be the next president of the United States. If I had to make decisions in business or in law or in any other way based on likely outcomes, I would look at the polls and I would probably predict that the most likely outcome is both a popular and an electoral victory for Vice President Biden. I would also predict, without any doubt, that the Democrats will retain control over the House of Representatives, which they've had now for a period of time. The hardest issue to predict is who will control the Senate, but the polls now show that at least there seems to be a significant likelihood that the Democrats may regain control of the Senate. So what does that mean for America? If we have the House and the Senate, both houses of the legislature, controlled by the Democrats, the presidency controlled by the Democrats, and the Supreme Court controlled by conservatives. As I've said for years, I think that the political branches of the government, the Congress, and the president are far more important to American governance than the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is very important. It has made, in my lifetime, perhaps a dozen decisions that have really changed the nature of America. Obviously, Brown versus Board of Education is one of them. Roe versus Wade is another. The right of gay people to marry is another. There have been some negative voting rights decisions and other decisions, but hard to name more than a dozen cases that have influenced the daily life of Americans. That's not the case with legislatures and with the presidency. They make decisions every day that influence our lives. And so, as a liberal Democrat, if I'm given the choice between controlling the political branches of the government and having liberal Democrats in charge, or having them in charge of the Supreme Court, I think it's more important to control the political branches of government. Sure, it's short term. It's only for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, depending how you count. But, with concerted effort, obviously, that situation can remain. And remember, most presidents, we may be living through an exception, are reelected. Joe Biden, if he's elected, would be the oldest president ever to be sworn in. And whether he would run for re-election in 4 years is an unknown. Whether he would win if he ran is an unknown. But at least for the next several years, if the polls are to be believed, we will see a divided government in the sense of the executive and the legislative branches in the hands of the Democrats, the judicial branch in the hands of conservatives, most of them, 6 of them appointed by Republican presidents. Does that mean the end of liberal values in America? Absolutely not. First of all, the legislature and the executive can have an important impact on a woman's right to choose. Congress can pass a national statute saying that it is in the national interest. It is a matter of importance in interstate commerce and national interest that every woman in America has the right to choose whether to give birth to a child or to abort the child, certainly within a period of time. I do not believe you're going to find very many justices saying there is a constitutional right to life which would prohibit states or the federal government from giving a woman the right to choose abortion. I don't think you're going to get many votes for that, and I don't think the American public would stand for that. After all, even in the most religiously conservative countries in the world today, Ireland, Italy, you name it, the woman's right to choose has been elevated above any claimed rights of the fetus, notwithstanding religious objections. We are living in an increasingly secularized world. It's coming late to America, to be sure. We are among the most religious, westernized countries in the world today, but it's coming to this country as well. So I think Congress could craft legislation that I think would be upheld by the Supreme Court, making abortion a national issue. I also think that the president can issue executive orders involving abortion rights in hospitals that are funded by the federal government. And there are a great many things that the elected branches of government can do to strengthen a woman's right to abortion. The same thing is true with gay rights. We could have a national gay rights statute, which would give even more teeth to anti-discrimination laws nationally. Remember that at the time the Constitution was enacted, the Interstate Commerce Clause was written when people didn't move, when people were born and died and were buried in Virginia or in Massachusetts. Today we live in a mobile society. And today, a woman's right to have an abortion does impact directly on interstate commerce. Because if you ban abortion in Mississippi, women who can afford it at least will move to a place where they can get a safe and reasonably priced abortion. So it will affect interstate commerce. Gay couples are not bound to live where they were born. They could move to a different place where marriage is recognized. You know, people forget that the Supreme Court decision Roe versus Wade did not give women a right to choose abortion. They already had that right in many states. The same thing was true of gay marriage. Massachusetts people were marrying, California people were marrying well before the Supreme Court recognized that as a constitutional right. It was already a state right. In many states, already a state constitutional right. And so we can see increasing state legislation. Remember, even the most extremist views on the right to life today, the most extremist views say, leave it to the states, leave it to the states. Okay, so people like me who strongly support a woman's right to choose have to spend more time in politics, more time getting state legislatures to accord that right to women, and trying to get the national legislature and the national executive to grant that right as well. So the nature of politics may change over the next 4, 8, 10 years. We may see much greater emphasis on the legislative process, on the executive process, and less of an emphasis on the judicial process. Now, we who are liberals can't control the judicial process. You're going to still get conservative activists who are going to be bringing cases to the courts, particularly to the Supreme Court, in the hope of undoing what legislatures have done. In fact, we're going to see an absolute flip on claims today. You hear today, even if you listen to the confirmation process, you hear Republicans railing against judicial activism. Well, you're going to hear Democrats and liberals in the future railing against judicial activism because they don't like the activism of the current Supreme Court. And you're going to see conservatives advocating judicial activism. No, we want the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. We want the Supreme Court to strike down this law, that law, the other law. We want the Supreme Court to get involved and to make sure that our conservative values. Well, no, that's not the job of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not supposed to be an activist political institution serving the will of either liberals or conservatives. The Supreme Court, as Judge Barrett has correctly said, is a responsive organization, not a proactive one. It takes cases that are brought to it. What she left out, and what I think a number of the senators, Democratic senators, pointed out very aptly, is you have today conservative activist litigation groups who go and look for plaintiffs, who go and look for litigants, so that they can bring challenges to the United States Supreme Court. And what we need are equal sides on the liberal perspective that oppose bringing cases to the Supreme Court. And let's really see if the conservatives on the Supreme Court mean it when they say they don't want to become legislatures, they don't want to make the law, they just want to apply the law. Let's see, now that they have a firm majority, whether the conservatives on the Supreme Court will become activists, as liberals did when they had a majority on the Supreme Court. Hypocrisy is not limited to the presidency and the legislative branches. We see plenty of hypocrisy on the United States Supreme Court and in courts in general. Look, judges are human beings. They put on robes, to be sure. In Britain, they put on wigs to disguise themselves and make it seem like all judges are fungible and the same, and they just apply the law as if they can pull it out of the sky. That's not the way judges operate. We know that judges are human beings. They come to the court with fully formed political ideas. If anybody ever doubted that, look at Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court decision in 2000 that gave the presidency essentially to George W. Bush when a majority of Americans voted against him, and I think a majority of Floridians voted against him. To admit, I was one of the lawyers in that case, in the Palm Beach County butterfly ballot case. But the Supreme Court decision was based on a 5-4 vote, and it was 5 justices getting to vote twice. once in the election where their vote hardly counted. They were just one of millions. And then again on the Supreme Court, where they figured out a way by stretching the law, by becoming very activist judges, figured out a way of striking down the Florida state court decisions allowing a recount. That was judicial activism at its most extreme. And it was decided by 5 justices who preferred to see George Bush as president than Al Gore as president. Part of the reason is they wanted to see George Bush nominate more conservatives to the court. That was a hypocritical decision. I wrote a book about it called Supreme Injustice, and it was about how the majority of 5 Republicans really engaged in judicial activism to turn an election over to their preferred candidate. We'll see more of that now that the conservatives have an even stronger majority, but we have the ability to fight back. We have the ability to fight back through legislative actions and through executive actions. You know, we're fortunate that we live in a country that has a government that's divided into 3 co-equal branches. The legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Each serves as a check on the other. For most of our history, the Supreme Court of the United States has been a conservative check on more populist branches of government. Certainly during the New Deal, we saw conservative justices repeatedly striking down liberal innovations of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We saw that throughout our history, and we've survived. We've survived with conservative Supreme Courts. Once we had to fight a civil war after the infamous Dred Scott case, where a majority of the Supreme Court ruled that the descendants of African American people were not citizens and could not be given the right to citizens. One justice, Justice Curtis, who dissented, not only dissented, but quit the Supreme Court in protest, resigned in protest, and then became Andrew Johnson's lawyer arguing against his impeachment, even though Johnson was a segregationist and an opponent of Reconstruction. You had a great justice and a great advocate arguing against impeachment because he didn't believe the Constitution permitted impeachment for the allegations that were made against President Johnson. I followed Justice Curtis's arguments and used many of them in my argument against impeaching a president I didn't vote for. And so that's the American way. Checks and balances, tripartite government, division of powers, separation of powers. It serves us well. We're entering a new era. If the predictions and the polls are correct, we're going to see executive, legislative branches controlled by the Democrats, and we're going to see the judicial branch controlled by Republican-appointed conservatives. We'll live through it. We'll manage. We'll survive. It will not be a disaster. It will cause some problems for individuals. It will set back some liberal and progressive programs, but we will survive. And we just have to learn how to use the legislative and executive branches more effectively. And we have to learn how to politic in the states more effectively and more aggressively for values we believe in, like the right to choose abortion, the right to choose one's marriage partner, the right to make sure there are reasonable restrictions on gun ownership. These are political issues that we as liberals and Democrats should fight for. Those of you who are watching the Durst Show who are conservatives and Republicans, you should fight for your values. And you will win sometimes, you will lose sometimes. Sometimes there will be a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. When I was a law clerk on the Supreme Court in 1963 and 1964, we had a liberal majority on the Supreme Court. It was close, but we had Chief Justice Earl Warren, and we had my boss, Justice Arthur Goldberg, and we together wrote a lot of liberal decisions. Remember, there were signs all over the country: impeach Earl Warren, impeach Bill Douglas, impeach the justices of the Supreme Court. In those days, judicial activism was feared by the right. Today, judicial activism is feared by the left. Welcome to America. We are a great country with a great constitution built to last for a long time. It served us well for 130 almost years. It will continue to serve us for the next 130 years, regardless of who is on the United States Supreme Court. So, my liberal friends, my Democratic friends, fight harder. Don't worry. Don't grieve. Not a time for celebration, not a time for bemoaning the future. The future is yours to control. On this show, on the Dirt Show, you'll always hear an analysis of what's going on. Yeah, I'm not going to try to hide my own perspective. I have a perspective. I'm a liberal Democrat, but I'm a constitutionalist. I put the Constitution first. I care deeply about the Constitution. I'm a liberal Democrat who opposed President Trump's impeachment. I'm a liberal Democrat who supported some of President Trump's policies with regard to foreign policy, the Middle East, and opposed some of Barack Obama's policies, a man who I voted for and knew as a student. So you'll always get it straight on the Dirt Show. Now it's time to hear your voice. Robert from Oklahoma.
Hi, Professor. My name is Robert from Oklahoma. My question is, what are your thoughts on the General Michael Flynn case, specifically Judge Sullivan and the way he's been acting? And thanks. If you can give me your thoughts, that'd be great. All right. Thank you.
Great question. I think that the general lied. I don't think he told the truth when he was asked about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. And this is going to sound strange, but I don't think he committed perjury. Perjury requires that the lie be material to the investigation. The FBI already knew what he had said. They had recorded his conversation. So they asked him a question to which they not only knew the answer, but they had the answer on tape. So there was no disputing it. It was a perjury trap, and he fell into the perjury trap. Probably as a result of that, he should have lost his job as National Security Advisor, but he should not have been prosecuted. It was an improper prosecution. There were other things wrong with it, threats against his son, etc. So I completely and totally support the decision of the Justice Department to drop the charges against him. They had the right to do that. Judge Sullivan did not have the right to intrude on that decision. The courts have said now he has the right to have a hearing and determine whether there was any corruption involved, but absent any corruption, by which I mean, bribery or anything of that kind, the Justice Department gets to make the decision who to prosecute, when to drop prosecutions, and when there's no longer a case and controversy in front of the courts. Courts are not sitting there to do what they believe is ultimate justice. They're there as umpires. They're there to resolve disputes. Judge Sullivan doesn't want to be an umpire. He doesn't want to call balls and strikes. He wants to be the commissioner of baseball to determine what the rules are. Well, he was not elected to be the commissioner of baseball or the commissioner of ethics. He was appointed to resolve disputes between the United States government and the plaintiff in the case. And the plaintiff in the case does not have a dispute with the government. And so that should be the end of the matter, and we should put it to rest. So I disagree with Judge Sullivan, and I agree with General Flynn. Now we're going to hear from Eric in Mississippi.
I really enjoy your shows. One, mostly because your comments and your thoughts are very thought-provoking. They're not only just educational, but they get a person to thinking about a lot of things, and I appreciate that. My question to you is that if the Democrats win the House and the Senate and the presidency and they pack the court, how is that counteracted if in 4 years, in 2024, the Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the presidency? Is there a way to reverse the packing of the court, or is it just we have to wait until it dwindles by attrition? I look forward to your comments, and thank you very much.
What a great question. If the Republicans were to regain the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they could pack the court themselves. Say the Democrats pack the court, added 2 justices or 4 justices. The Republicans could add 2 or 4. They could also cut back the number of justices, but they couldn't get rid of any of the sitting justices. They would have to wait until a vacancy occurred, and then the vacancy wouldn't be filled. And there will be 2 vacancies in the near future. I think that both Justice Thomas and there may be other justices as well who are now in their 70s and 80s, and they may very well retire, depending on who gets elected, whether it's Democrat or Republican. But eventually, all justices retire or die, as we saw with Justice Ginsburg. She tried very hard to hold on for as long as possible, but eventually nature prevails. As the Yiddish expression goes, man plans, God laughs. She planned to stay on until her replacement could be made by a Democrat. It didn't happen. So, yeah, we could see a game where the Democrats pack the court, then the Republicans pack it, and then maybe the Democrats try to unpack it. It would so politicize the Supreme Court that I think both parties would think better. I already have heard hints from Joe Biden that he's not a fan of court packing, and I suspect that he would veto a law that increased the number of justices to the Supreme Court. Ralph from New York City, what do you have to say?
I was wondering what you might have thought about the Supreme Court itself, the current justices running the confirmation process, asking all the probing questions of the nominee, and then, of course, the Senate votes after hearing that question answer. Curious on your thoughts on that. Thanks so much.
What a fascinating idea. I don't think the justices would agree to do it. They try their best to stay out of politics. They try their best not to serve the legislative branch of the government. But in the alternative, what I would propose is Supreme Court litigators, great lawyers who argue many cases in front of the Supreme Court from both sides, asking the questions, because they know the Supreme Court better than anybody, certainly better than the senators, and they would ask better and harder and more probing questions. So I think we can improve the process, but I think involving Supreme Court justices themselves in the process of confirming the people who will serve with them would not be a good idea. But it's a very interesting one. Thanks. Okay, our next caller.
I am 89 years old, and I've been watching you on Twitter, and I love everything you say, and I love to watch you on Fox. I'm not going to leave my name because I have nothing else to say. I admire you so much. I do not like professors, but I do like you, and I love listening to you, and I believe everything you say because you are very truthful. Thank you.
Wow, great. I love having young fans. 89 years old, stay young, stay healthy, stay well. I so much appreciate your support, but it doesn't matter whether you like me or don't like me. Call in, leave short messages. We're available 24/7 to take your calls, and I promise you'll never be bored. An important part of the Dems Show is your voice, your questions, your comments. Please call 24/7. The number is 216-710-0050. Keep your comments short and to the point. Again, the number for you to call 24/7 is 216-710-0050. Hard questions, criticisms, everything's fine. Just keep your questions short, and I'll answer them all on the Dems Show.